is this lost century? This lost century is literally 100 years, more than that now, of technologies that have existed that have vanished. I mean, I was just recently in a meeting in Washington with the people who manage the black budget of the United States. They have no access to this material because between the late 1800s and now, the ingenious inventions and sciences that could have moved us off that extinction level path that we're on have all been ruthlessly suppressed, confiscated. And the only way that's going to change, it is not going to change in Washington. It is not going to change in a large corporation. Unlikely. It's going to change by us, the people doing it. So it's about us. So here's your energy grid. 12% is a new renewable. The rest is the old system. So if you plug in your electric car, 88% of the power is coming from gas and oil and coal.
The entire world is running on an energy paradigm of scarcity, meaning that there's never more energy than we generate, and we lose that energy as we move it around and deploy it in different ways. And so energy is expensive, and energy is difficult to get to remote areas. And that energy is important because it's inputs in growing food, and it's inputs in manufacturing, and it's inputs in the economy, and it's inputs in all of these things that make people's lives better and that solve the problems that desperately need to be solved on the planet right now. Over-unity is a very simple idea. It's that you're getting more energy out of something than you're putting into it. And according to mainstream science, that's impossible. So over-unity is more than just a breakthrough that's going to live its life in a technical paper. It's not that. It's really the ability of humans to liberate themselves.
Yes, there is a history, a long history of over-unity systems. For example, Nikola Tesla had one. Basically, his big magnifying transformer that he had on Long Island was such an over-unity system. He got the entire Earth itself in resonance. Everything going on is feeding energy into the Earth starts to feed energy into that wave that he created. So he gets a lot more energy in his resonant wave fed from outside, from the environment in the interior of the Earth. His idea was you could then put in a tap on it anywhere else on the world and extract it free. And of course, J.P. Morgan's take on that was, that's foolish. You can't put a meter on it. So that actually doomed much of Tesla's career at that point when Morgan found out that Tesla, was going to produce the energy freely.
A farmer and engineer named Stubblefield with Tesla, he had something they called the Earth battery, or the Stubblefield battery, and it had rods going into the Earth and some wiring, and it was picking up this magnetic flux field of the planet, and he was running his farm, and Tesla was there with him. 1902. So when I say 100 years, lost century, no.
There's an interesting record of people that have come up with new alternatives to the oil and gas industry who have met untimely demises. I don't know if you'd say that's true in terms of Nikola Tesla specifically, but he was hit by a taxi cab back in the early 1930s and didn't die immediately, but then died alone in a hospital room a few years later.
When they found out that Tesla had passed away in the Hotel New Yorker, they came in, they had the manager of the hotel open the safe, and they took all of Tesla's papers.
So here you have an actual FBI document, and the Department of Defense is demanding they turn over what they seized in 1943. Now, this used to be an urban myth. Oh, well, he had these secret inventions and papers, and the government stole it. No, it's right here.
That technology and what was in those boxes, what was written in those papers, we do not know, and we may not ever know.
So they go in, the FBI takes it, and here the Department of Defense years later is saying, we want all those papers that you confiscated in 1943 upon Nikola Tesla's death. And then you have just flat out patent confiscation through national security orders. Look at this. This is 12 years ago. 5,135 inventions seized under national security orders. Okay, we're not talking about an extraterrestrial spacecraft or anti-gravity or gravity control. We're talking about just a super efficient solar panel. Those are confiscated. This is one of my favorite statements of this report. One may fairly ask if disclosure of such technologies could really have been detrimental to the national security, or whether the opposite would be closer to the truth.
Yeah, we hear the words vital interests of national security. Well, what we're really talking about there, in terms of Iraq, for example, in the early 2000s, which was all trumped up. There were no weapons of mass destruction. That's what was being touted by the media, Sir Judith Miller at the New York Times and others, to justify what we were doing to get rid of Saddam Hussein. But in fact, the only national security implication of that was the oil industries, what they get from it.
It's a policy that the military seems to feel is necessary for national security. However, at this point, we often wonder, 50 years after World War II and the Cold War, whether such sequestering is necessary, especially when fossil fuels are a major cause of global warming.
So here we have a man. He was fired, Dr. Tom Vallone, he's a PhD physicist. He was a patent examiner, and he saw these amazing technologies being confiscated. This is not a conspiracy theory. And he blew the whistle. They fired him, because he saw things that would save the planet. Now, this is way back in the 80s or 90s.
Patent sequestering, which is actually called secretizing, public needs to know at least that every major military agency has a representative at the patent office.
So, T. Henry Moray had a device, no input energy once he got it set up, output 50 kilowatts. He had multiple assassination attempts and finally was bankrupted in his lab. This was the 1930s.
There is absolutely no question that T. Henry Moray had a system that produced about 50 kilowatts out of a 55-pound box. There's all kinds of skullduggery that happened there. The Russians even tried to kidnap him at one time. It reads like a James Bond movie, but it's real. It really happened, and it really happened here in the United States.
Here's a friend of mine. He was a Wright-Patterson Project Blue Book guy, but when he retired, he built a device that you could put on the air intake of a car. This is in the 80s, where you would get anywhere from 20 to 40% more range, miles per gallon, on conventional.
I treat air, and out of air, I make it more than just providing oxygen for the combustion process. There are combustion-stimulating molecules and radicals generated in this process. Thunderstorm in a bottle.
He had his lab vandalized, everything stolen, bomb threats, etc. This is a colonel who put his entire life savings into something in the 80s that would have been a game changer. But it wasn't a free energy device. It wasn't something just running out of the 0 point. It would have just gotten more efficiency and cleaned up the air.
The Environmental Protection Agency is a bit of a dictatorial police agency. They call themselves a protecting agency, but they are a police agency. EPA cannot approve a fuel-saving device. They put out reams of documentation stating that something will not work.
This gentleman actually took a device from a Russian immigrant and another and kind of packaged it. He didn't actually understand it that much. And you had 26, almost 27 watts going in, 7,460 watts going out, and tested and verified by multiple labs.
Gray started developing this idea 8 years ago. For the past year and a half, he's been trying to get someone in the U.S. government interested. So far, he's had little luck. Gray says he's been getting the same reaction he got 30 years ago when he first proposed his theory.
Get this guy out of here, he is crazy.
But Gray says it's paranoia. The scientific community isn't willing to accept teachings opposite all previous learning. And the military aerospace industry is afraid to admit decades and billions of dollars worth of research have been wasted.
Now, unfortunately, this disappeared because he actually took the ideas from some geniuses and was trying to make a lot of money. And so his became, I'm calling this crazy inventor syndrome. It's not very nice, but I mean, it's kind of crazy. And here's why it's crazy. They think I have the best thing since sliced bread, and the world's going to be the path to my door. And they don't realize they're going to have corrupt interests from the national security state, corporations, and all kinds of other people stop them. So they think they're going to do a normal investment and normal venture capital and patent it or keep the secret sauce of how it works away from everyone. And in every single case for 100 plus years, they've taken that knowledge to their grave. So having done that for 31 years now, I have been dealing with people with these devices since 1991. Almost all of them fall into some part of this syndrome, and it's a tragedy. You'll see the device, I'll have engineers come in and test it, and they go, oh no, I'm gonna keep it secret, nobody can know but me, and I need to make a bunch of money. They wanna be the next Rockefeller of energy. And the next thing you know, they're dead, or the device is confiscated, or it vanishes in a buyout. So this guy had the same problem. He had a device, they have it there still running. But they think that no one can know this but them. They're buying into the paranoia. My answer is open source it, dump it on the internet, blockchain, or any way you can. You have no patent, no intellectual property. The whole world knows about it, and every scientific lab in the world can reproduce it. We're gonna get to this strategy in a minute. That's how we go, we gotta do that.
Many of these inventors are really good at the technical stuff, but they're not great communicators.
This power is something I have given my life for you, the people. Now set up this demonstration for y'all. You don't have to be a rocket scientist.
They're not good at business. They're not. Like, God can make technical geniuses and he can make business savvy people, but rarely do the two come together in one person.
This story is fascinating because he had a tiny, you know what 17 watts is? Like a 20 watt light bulb. It was putting out 200 watts, 10 to 15 times more output than input. This is in the 80s, this is 40 years ago.
I was not convinced probably on the first 3 times that I saw the device and saw it tested that indeed it put out more energy than it took in. I am convinced now. I was a little bit prejudiced, and like all people that come up with devices like this, you think they're wrong, and so you go down to prove them wrong if you're that interested. And I was not able to prove him wrong, nor were the people that I was with able to prove him wrong.
And here's what happened. He kept the whole thing so secret. It was going through a patenting process, but even the patent application left out a lot of the secret sauce. Most of these inventors do this. Fatal mistake. And what happened is that it was all covered up, that he actually was taken to court. Patent office said, even though he had proof that it worked from multiple very esteemed scientists, patent examiners, that proved that the thing actually did as he said it did, and he got nowhere. He took this to his grave. Look at this video that you're going to see in a moment.
Mr. Newman has been fighting for a patent for years. Many, therefore, considered it ironic when a federal judge appointed the former head of the patent office, William Schuyler, to decide if Newman's device did or did not work. Mr. Schuyler, who is also considered to be an expert on electrical engineering, didn't take long to make his decision. In a report of the special master, Mr. Schuyler states, evidence before the court is overwhelming that Newman has built and tested a prototype of his invention in which the output energy exceeds the external input energy. Therefore, there is no contradictory factual evidence. For the layman, that means the machine works. The expert then goes on to say, the Patent Office finding that such a machine is impossible is clearly erroneous. Mr. Schuyler also found that the Patent Office intentionally did not consider the formalities of Mr. Newman's application for a patent.
Why wouldn't you go along, again, with a master that's former head of the Patent Office, who has credentials that the judge called outstanding? Why wouldn't you go along with the man that you recommended in granting a patent?
You ask mean questions, don't you? I think you'd have to address that question to our present commissioner.
Are you acting on his orders?
You might say that, yes.
There you go.
Operability or utility is a rejection that virtually none of the patent examiners, and there's almost 5,000 of us, were allowed to use in any of our applications. The supervisor particularly always said that, oh, that's something only if you're dealing with energy inventions. So what we find is that throughout the Patent Office, that rejection for something that we personally would feel would not be operable was not a judgment we were allowed to make, except if we're in that security department that deals with energy and propulsion types of inventions.
Here we have a brilliant device, again, almost 40 years ago. Look at the input and output. Test it over and over again. 0.3 milliwatts, output 223,000 watts. That's 22.4 kilowatts. That's plenty to run your car, your Tesla motor. Now, continuously output if needed on demand. So this little thing that looks like a cigarette pack, when he died, under mysterious, they said a heart attack, it's all kinds of evidence he was killed.
This is real, usable power. It's stable. It is not transient. It is not noise. And it is not any other kind of spurious effect. This is a real effect. It's all coming from that little tiny box sitting behind the 500 watts of power. Behind the lamps, that little box is putting out all of that power, well over 500 watts, and yet it is receiving less than 1/3 of a milliwatt of input power. This is April the 30th, 1987, at about 10:30 p.m. in the home of Mr. Sparky Sweet, the inventor of the very first vacuum triode. This is a most historical occasion.
I was altered when I saw it because my view was that you could be anywhere then in the universe. You could be in a cave, you could be anywhere, and you had energy.
The rest of that power is coming out of the surging energy of the vacuum. And this little box that you see right here, solid state, no moving parts, is the vacuum triode that's doing this very practical and historical work. He was shot at once with a silenced rifle from about 300 yards. The only thing saved his life was he was an old guy and very feeble. He was stumbling as he coming up the steps and he fell down. He just flat fell down on the steps, caught his foot and fell right forward. And as his head went forward, the bullet went right by where his head was. And of course, the assassin was never found.
This guy called me up. He said, we really need your help. And I said, the only way you're going to do this is that you disclose it, all of it, open source it, get it out there. I will see that we get it out to the entire scientific community. He says, no, no, no. It's Gollum, my precious, my precious, my precious. And I said, dude, you're going to take this to your grave. He took it to his grave. Yep, it's gone.
This very distraught lady, who's Sparky's wife, she's saying Sparky's dead. And that she said 2 strange men, she called them strange men, showed up at about 5 o'clock the night before, and they stayed for a little while, and then they left. And Sparky, an hour or 2 later, having a cup of coffee and just killed over onto the floor, called the ambulance, and she was 75 years old. They would not let her in the ambulance. And the ambulance then called her back about 20 minutes later and said, we don't think he's going to make it. And that was the end of that until the next morning when she called my sister-in-law and talked to her and said, there are men here that said they're FBI and they got black vans and they're taking all this equipment. What should I do?
Good afternoon and welcome to this edition of Eyewitness Newsmakers. I'm your host, Doug Miller. On March the 23rd, chemists Stanley Pons and Martin Fleischmann rocked the world of science. They announced that they had achieved cold fusion in their laboratory at the University of Utah. The promise of a cheap and a plentiful energy supply grabbed the world's attention.
It didn't put out a lot of power, but what was scary is that This is 1989. It made the, cover of all the magazines. The way they took that avenue of discovery out of the scientific world is that there were people who were paid, who were corrupted through scientific fraud at MIT. Next slide. Dr. Eugene Maloff, dear friend of mine, PhD, Harvard and MIT, brilliant man.
There was a man named Eugene Maloff who it's quite possible was eliminated by the powers that be in the fossil fuel industry. He died in 2004. He was murdered that year. But Maloff was an extremely important figure in the alternative energy world, especially in terms of what's called cold fusion.
And he was at MIT in the science office for education when he saw how they had changed the data on the reproducing the Pons-Fleischmann experiment. And he blew the whistle.
I inadvertently was looking through some piles of paper that had been given to me in a casual manner by all these hot fusion physicists as they were trying to do their calorimetric repeat of the Pons-Fleischmann experiment. And to my utter astonishment, I can remember sitting at my desk in my study and actually seeing these two sheets of paper, one dated July 10th, 1989, and another dated July 13th, 3 days apart. The difference between July 10th and 13th was dramatic, and I was stunned. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It looked like monkey business to me at the time, and it has turned out to be exactly that. It was a lower echelon person in the Plasma Fusion Center at MIT, one of the 16 authors of a scientific paper done under Department of Energy contract that had altered data. And that data is scientific fraud, as far as I'm concerned, and many other people are concerned.
And it was, it was hell on wheels. Finally get someone who brings him a 0-point device, solid state, no moving parts. And I said, Gene, we need to get this out to the public very quickly. Oh no, they want to keep it secret. I begged him and I begged him and I begged him and I begged him. He was beaten to death when he was over at his parents' home and was killed, murdered. Made to look like some thugs. They were thugs, but it wasn't a random murder. And the device vanished with him. Good friend of mine, dear friend.
What we really had was a threat to the scientific establishment. The threat of it even being implied as real and having monies, shall we say, being diverted from their favored programs, and that was a threat, no question. There was an actual threat of that happening.
This gentleman, he had a car that would run on water, but it had to be modified.
A local inventor has discovered a way, hear this, to use water to run your car.
It's a major breakthrough that will no doubt make motorists happy. And as Ralph Robinson explains, the Pentagon is also showing lots of interest in this project.
And he always kept that secret. He had a patent that he falsified the voltage and the frequency, cycles per second, because he didn't want anyone to reproduce it and leapfrog him financially. Again, this crazy inventor syndrome. And what happened, and when he passed away, there was a whole warehouse full of floppy disks and papers and everything, and his heirs wanted to sell it off. What people didn't realize is that this car was the least important thing Stan Meyer had. He had a toroid, and the toroid, it was a donut-shaped electromagnetic device that had had a national security order slapped on it. Because I was going to get it and openly disclose it.
Though the scientific establishment may have ignored the likes of Meyer, the powerful military-industrial complex certainly hasn't. Over the past 10 years, Meyer says he's been quietly approached by many influential organizations who would never admit publicly to their involvement with him.
This was a disaster. If we had a few $100,000 we were going to offer, but we made it clear we were going to open source it. Well, they had a group, an engineering group from Michigan come in, who had a lot more money because they had a big backer. And they were going to monetize it, keep it secret, try to repatent it, all the usual crazy ideas, which would be great if you're just developing a new software program, but not something that's going to change the world forever. Can't do it. They were working on a couple years. I get this hysterical call. He says, Dr. Greer, we need your help. We need your help. He says, they're on the run for their lives. they've been sabotaged, they've had death threats. And my advice was, forget about Gollum and be in my ring, and my precious ring. In this case, it was literally a precious ring. Just put it out there. I will help spread it. We will build these up independently, have labs tested, and you cannot put that toothpaste back in the tube. You squeeze it hard enough. He says, yes, you're right. It's probably the only way. But they think they can find a safe country to go to. I said, you're going to have to go to another star system, my friend. I literally said that. No way that's going to happen. So sure enough, I find out a few months later, I'm meeting with a high-tech guy in Orange County. That entire team was assassinated. The one survived. It was just crying like a baby in this man's office.
Technology shows that we can release energy up to beyond 2.5 million barrels of oil per gallon of water and do it safely. So it gives us the ability to not only sustain and maintain the economies of the world, but also give us the abilities to handle the environmental pollution problems at the same time.
This sort of encapsulates, 5 or 10 of the suppression techniques, all the way from murder to crazy inventor syndrome, falsifying your patent, trying to make money first instead of proving the science first, etc. And of course, he took this to his grave. He was poisoned and killed at a Cracker Barrel.
Stan Meyer's water engine points us to a deeper mystery concerning energy in our universe: microscopic ball lightning. The late physicist Ken Shoulders developed a technology called charge clusters, which are likened to ball lightning. When they are discharged, they actually tap into the zero-point energy field. This is where most of the power in Stan Meyer's device was coming from. Like Stan, Ken Shoulders faced terrible suppression.
And so I met with this CEO, and he says, yes, they approved a $5 million grant from DOE so we could develop this further, because one of the effects it had that they were really pursuing was putting low-level, initially, radioactive waste in these charge clusters, and it would cause isotopes that were non-radioactive to be created. What does this mean? We clean up all the radioactive waste. However, the phenomenon, the reason it was doing it was that it was actually activating, as it were, this baseline energy field that's at the fabric of space and time. And that's what they didn't want out. So in the rarest of events, that grant was published, and these vicious people who want to keep all this stuff secret went into the Secretary of Energy's office and said, pull that grant. And they pulled it.
Another technology to harness the power of ball lightning is being developed by a team of engineers in Florida. They have successfully tested several prototypes that allow any internal combustion engine to run mostly on water.
It's a little quicker, huh?
This is a phenomenal system, patented, but it runs internal combustion engines on water with a little bit of gasoline in it so you don't have to modify the engine. It won't rust. What this means is, with Stan Meyer, you really had to have a different kind of engine and spark plug and all that. This conventional spark plug engine, all of it, because it has enough of the lubricant oil in it that it won't just freeze up the engine. And this is really what he's doing. Stan Meyer, this device, and many of the others, Ken Shoulders charge clusters, they're creating these small microscopic ball lightnings that when they discharge are tapping into that zero-point energy field and creating the motive force.
Some people wonder why we don't know more about this. Why isn't the media telling us what's really going on? We have about 15 billionaires and 6 corporations controlling 90% of the media in the United States. We've got AT&T, Comcast, Walt Disney Company, National Amusements, that includes Viacom and CBS News, and Fox Corporation. They rely on advertising revenue, and that's going to mean they're towing a certain line.
This is a CIA document. It was released. I was surprised it was released, and it says that we have relationship with every major wire service, newspaper, news weekly, and television network in the nation. In many instances, we have persuaded reporters to postpone, change, hold, or scrap stories that could have adversely affected national security interests or jeopardized sources and methods. Here's another part of your Truman Show everyone's been forced to live in. The idea that we have a free press or that we have a free market economy. Pray tell any economist in here, I challenge you, how do we have a free market if the most important scientific breakthroughs of the last 100 years have been ruthlessly confiscated, people murdered, and kept off the market? No, it's a controlled economy. It's a controlled media. It's an abomination, and it's killing the planet.